Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. My name is Dr. Hafeez Jamali. I'm a civil servant and a social anthropologist. We are here today with a very eminent and distinguished guest, Professor Jürgen Schaflechner. Pardon my German pronunciation. This Professor Jürgen has a is a can I pause it quickly? I'm sorry. We have to. I have to.
Okay, so it seems like we have some time. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about the book, which has been published.
Sorry, my apologies. I'm sort of conducting this from my home, and my little daughter sort of interrupted us.
Sure.
So I was just saying that Professor Jürgen teaches at the Freie University in Berlin, where he is is leading a research group in the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology, where they study political and social movements of religious minorities in South Asia. And the book Hinglaj, Devi, Identity, Change and Solidification at a Hindu Temple in Pakistan was published by OUP in 2018. It is a landmark book as far as I know, and perhaps the only book which has studied the history, social anthropology, and contemporary ritual dynamics of Hinglaj Mata Mandir, one of the most significant sites of Hinduism in Pakistan today. So, I would recommend it to everyone. So let's start by asking some, introductory questions. Professor Jürgen, can I ask you sort of what motivated you to choose this sort of Hinglaj Mata as the focus of your research and study? Was it sort of by coincidence, or is there sort of a longer story behind your endeavor?
Sure. So again, thank you so much for inviting me and talking about the book. It's, I think, a little bit of both, right? So usually you would have a beautiful original story, where you say, well, it was always my dream. And that's partly true, but it's also true that that the book also comes from my career as working on ritual dynamics. The place was actually suggested to me by one of my professors who wanted to go there for a very long time, William Sachs, who had been studying parts of the Nath tradition, but also Hinduism in the Himalayas, and always heard about Hinglaj, right? And this is where the serendipity comes in, right? So I came to Pakistan first time as a tourist in 2006, and wanted to work on Pakistan, just wanted to know more, right? Because I was fascinated. I came to Lahore first and then went down to the south to Multan. And when it was possible for me then to get a PhD position and this topic came up, I was very excited to be able to do that. On top of it, what was exciting for me is to study one of the like very large groups. I mean, people say that there are between to 10 million Hindus living in Pakistan today, mainly 90% of them in the province of Sindh, and that's around the same kind of number that people live in Austria, in my own home country. So that's a huge group of people. And so how do you study such a heterogeneous community, right? How do you approach this? So you need spokespersons, right? You need publications, but you also need places, practices, right? Ritual journeys, pilgrimages. And so Hinglaj was, as I saw it, and then I was confirmed over my research between 2009 and 2015, was more and more the center of attention and the unifying signifier for this kind of Hindu practice in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And so it made sense to start in medias res and to start in the middle, start with a place, and then from the place see who comes there, ask the question why this is important for people, what kind of traditions are there, what kind of rituals are there, right? And so I started basically from the middle to understand this very vast and I think very beautiful, very heterogeneous community of Pakistani Hindus.
Thank you. And could you, that's a wonderful, story. Could you tell us a little bit about, because I know you earlier gave some video interviews to some of the Pakistani news outlets, and you also, there's a very short, nice introductory video where you explain in Urdu, the significance of Hinglaj Mata. It's beautifully made. But I was wondering if you could sort of recap and tell us in a little bit more detail about significance of Hinglaj Mata, and especially in the pantheon of Hinduism, more broadly speaking.
Right. I mean, the main thing to understand is that there is only over the last few years, there is one coherent story, right, that comes up about Hinglaj. So this is why I called the book also Solidification of Tradition, because even though the place is very old, right, so Hinglaj might be over 2,000 years old. We don't know. As long as there is no archaeological survey, we might never really know how old the place actually is, but it's on these trading routes connecting South Asia to the west and also to the north. So it's likely that from a very long time that there is some or the other form of ritual tradition there. Maybe even, before, what we now consider as being, community of Hindus. But this is really difficult to really confirm, right? But it might be very old. But what we find is that, let's say from the 14th to 15th century onwards, you actually find that there are traces of a ritual journey that has been kept until today, right? And that's exciting because you can really see that for many hundreds of years, people were walking to this place, right? They were risking their life, walking from the area of Kutch, walking from the area of central India, or this India today, right? But also at times, from far away from Bengal, risking their life because, as you know, and probably as many of the listeners know, this is a harsh environment. Balochistan desert is a very hostile and harsh environment, particularly hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right? So, and this is important to understand, that this part of the ritual journey, of the pilgrimage, this aloof, very difficult nature was kind of carved into what Hinglaj is for many people today, right? And this changed very recently. So what we find is that there is a form of institutionalization happening with a temple committee called the Hinglaj Shiva Mandali, which basically is a community of Hindus, mainly from the Lohna community from La Spela, who said in around the 80s, middle of the 80s, well, this is this place is so difficult to find and so many people want to go. We can organize a trip through the desert. At that time, with jeeps and because the road was not still there. And then you had this institutionalization in the 80s, and then suddenly, with 2001, when the Makran coastal highway connected Gwadar and Karachi, then you have a huge landslide, a huge shift. Because imagine what happened, a place that always was aloof, that always was very distant, a place where people in oral tradition, but also in texts, talked about how the goddess Hinglaj herself would meet people at the doorsteps of this valley and welcome them, because they had gone through so much peril and through such a difficult journey. And this journey is walking through the desert sun of Balochistan was always seen as a form of tapas, as a scene of cleansing ritual, so to say. And because of this cleansing, because of this toil, of this effort and so on, people were in a spiritual state to actually see and talk to the goddess directly, right? So this was there for so many hundreds of years. And then suddenly what happens is, incidentally, a road connects this distant shrine with Karachi. And now you can go into to Hinglaj within like 2.5 hours, 3 hours maybe from Karachi, and sit in a car in AC in an air condition, and you could be there within a day, do your darshan, so the ritual there, right, and then come back. So my main question was, what happened? This significant change. What happens to a place that always has been marked by being very spiritual, because it's so far away, because it's so elite, because it's very difficult to actually reach this place, right? What happens to such a place when then suddenly it is connected to urban Pakistan, and also, in fact, to the world, right? So not only Pakistani Hindus, or also, you know, any form of religion goes there for whatever reasons, but also the whole world, right? Indian guests would come and see Balochistan, people from South Africa would come, right? So what happens to this place then suddenly when it is connected through a road? That was one of the main questions that I had.
Wonderful. And I can totally sympathize with your sort of conundrum about sort of how old the site is, because every time that I visit Hinglaj Mata, the gentleman, the Purohit there, I forget his his name. Huh?
Gopal Maharaj.
Yeah. So he adds a zero to the age of the site. Tends to, it's probably not conscious, but the first time I or maybe my memory is frail. The first time I visited, he said it's hundreds of years old, and the next time I visited, he said thousands of years. So I feel like there is a sort of a bit of confusion there, which perhaps is natural. So I found it rather sort of amusing. But I thought maybe you have sort of better, sort of a dating methodology, but it looks like we are all sort of.
See, I mean, the problem is simply that there is no archaeological survey interested in Hinglaj thus far, and trying to connect the place through the Sanskrit sources is always notoriously difficult. To kind of locate, geopolitical developments through the Puranas, through the Sanskrit texts, is notoriously difficult because it shifts hundreds and hundreds of years of up and down. One of the main stories that kind of solidified around Hinglaj is the story, and I think that this might be interesting to say, is the story of Sati, right? So that's, I think, a very, very well-known story on the South Asian subcontinent. This idea that Sati wanted to marry a man of her own wishes, right? Shiva was an ascetic, a yogi, right? And Sati herself was the daughter of a king. So what does the daughter of a king do with a beggar, with a poor man? And so obviously her father was not very happy about this. And so when the father did one of these aristocratic, princely kind of rituals, Sati was very upset because Shiva was not invited, right? And so as a protest of this, she jumped into the Yakya Kund, into the fire kund, right? Where also, this practice of Sati then also comes from this story. When Shiva, as the story goes, heard about this, he was very upset and then traveled, to this place and took the body out and started a terrible dance, Tandava, which was about to destroy the whole universe, the whole world. And Vishnu, who is in the Hindu pantheon, the protector, came to cut this one version of the story, cut the body into many parts. And so all of these parts were scattered all over South Asia, right? So until today, there are, some people say 52, some people say 108 places of Shakti worship, so where parts of this goddess fell. And so one of the main stories in Hinglaj, and also one of the stories why it is such an important place, is that apparently the upper part of the head, the Brahmarangra, fell at this place, and is still to be seen there, right? And that's a story that has kind of, again, to use my own term here, has solidified a few hundred years ago. It's not as old as many would want to see it, but it is one of the main stories that people tell today. And now to fold this back to what you said about Gopal Maharaj and the dating of this place, since this is connected to this very, very important, very well-known place in very well-known myth in South Asia. This place is certainly a place of pride for Pakistani Hindus, because they know that even from India, as many would see it, right, the homeland of Hinduism, even from India, people come and they sit and they actually want to go and see this place in Balochistan, right? And so I can understand that one expression of this happiness and of this pride of being a part of this community that sits on this beautiful place is to make it older and older and older, right? Because the older things are, the more value they very often have in our tradition. Yeah. Gopal Maharaj was one of the main. Sorry was one of the main informants also in this book. There's also a picture of him in there. I hope he's well for a few years.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting and very sort of very human, you know, very likable. I was also thinking about, you know, what you spoke earlier, which is reflected also in the title of the book, Continuity and Change, right? So, I mean, I was sort of looking for, earlier practices at Hinglaj. There were some colonial records that I came across, from the East India Company period when Karachi was under British Raj, right? And I don't remember the name of the officer, but the gentleman officer had accompanied the Yatris, to Hinglaj, and apparently it and documented their journey in sort of whatever European perspective he had at that time. So I wondered, sort of in terms of the specific. Both the sort of the participants, in terms of people sort of coming from far away from Gujarat and other Varanasi and other places. There was also sort of mention of the Aghori Fakir, in that sort of report, in the colonial report. Mm-hmm. And then the specific waypoints where the pilgrims are to sort of pay their respects before sort of ending up at the shrine of the Mata or the Devi herself. I was wondering sort of how do you see sort of in terms of the changes in ritual practices? Of course, it's a very big question, but perhaps you could distill some of the salient aspects in terms of what might have been changes in ritual when sort of you spoke referred to an earlier period when people were coming on foot through this doing this tapasya, and then sort of now we have a different sort of set of routines. So could you speak to this change a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really interesting question, because what we find in Hinglaj is kind of symptomatic for this modern shift that you have in a lot of the sacred landscape that connects many parts of South Asia, right? So you could say that a more kinesthetic practice, meaning a practice that was more focused on the movement, the practice, the austerity, right? The difficulty along the way, a practice that was focused on, so to say, the movement, was shifted more to a sedentary practice, right? In other words, the way got less and less important, and the place got more and more important. So, for example, if you read if you listen to oral histories, or if you read travel logs, Moratir to Hinglaj would be one of them. The biggest part, of course, is the way, right? Because people need to follow certain places, people need to go from one place to the other. You have all of these paraos, stops, one of the most famous being the Chandrakoop, so the mud volcano, where certain rituals need to be done, and so on and so forth. And this has, with the construction of the road, with the Makran Coastal Highway, changed very much, right? So what you see is, on the one hand, a shift from kinesthetic practice towards more sedentary practices with a focus on the place. So which means the valley and the rituals within the valley got expanded, right? So you had more and more places inside the valley. I myself, in my time there, saw the inauguration, one could even say, you know, imagining then the inauguration and then the solidification, the sedimentation of two of these temples there, which were, when I was there, just little sticks, little picture of a goddess, and then the last time when I was there were actually really made in concrete, right? So they were then actually, I always imagine it as a certain form of rhythm, right? As a certain form of pattern, because people can only come at certain times. They come either in April, right, when it falls, when it's time for the Hinglaj Mela, which is usually some weekend in April. They come for Hindu festivals, but, and this is very, very interesting, most of them come on bank holidays. So you have a lot of Hindus coming to do rituals in Hinglaj, and on days like Muharram or Eid and so on, right? Why? No, there's nothing to do with any religious aspect. They have time. It's a bank holiday, so they have time. So all the time you have this rhythm, this pattern. Every year, certain practices come, other practices are cut out, certain practices are then more and more solidified, sedimented, right? And so to come back to what you asked before, so it's a very typical shift from the walking practice to the more sedentary focus, because it's also easy now to go, you know, not only, I mean, here we have a road, but one of the more obvious things that happened in the subcontinent was, of course, the railway, where people already 100 years ago were like, yeah, I mean, we had this great pilgrimage before where we walked to Varanasi and we did all the rituals, and then we walked back and we were happy because we were able to do this. And now we just sit in trains, right? So it seems like it shifts from decade to decade, from mode of transportation to mode of transportation, right? And with Hinglaj, you don't have a train, obviously, but you have the car, you know, the Toyota Corollas or the whatever they are, right? But then, and this is the last thing that I want to say, but then what happens is also almost the dialectical opposite of this, because since the road was established, people started to walk again. And that's such a curious and interesting development. Imagine, people didn't know for a very long time where to go, where it was, where the water was, where would they go there, where would they get their food, and so on, right? And with the construction of the roads, then people were daring again to walk again. So whilst between, you know, let's say around the separation of the subcontinent until, let's say, 65, there was some movement. After 65, there was almost no movement. And then the movement started again when the Makran Coastal Highway then was constructed, because people suddenly knew exactly where to go, because it directly passes by the valley. And also they were not afraid of dying because of thirst or because of food, right? So there's this whole industry that also developed with the construction of a road that connects and works with people who now want to walk there. Karachi, many from the Narayanpur neighborhood, for example, in Karachi, many people would walk from there, right? And they would push a little cart with the murti, so the statue of the goddess on. They would have music, they would have food and drinks, right? It would be an event happening for many of them. So, long answer to your great question, I think. Hinglaj is not different, I think, to any of the modernization processes that we had, but these modernization processes also triggered the dialectical other, so to say, right? Where people, because it has become so easy to go there, now actually say, it's not proper to sit there in the car. We need to revitalize the moving practice. So we need to walk along the road, right? I hope that answered your question. I was wondering a little bit. Sorry.
I think that's a great point, because, you know, there is a tendency, at least among lay people or even among our informed audiences, to look at tradition as somewhat of a fixed set of practices, And as anthropologists, we know that tradition is anything but fixed. It is dynamic, it changes, and it revitalizes itself, even sort of as you pointed out, in the face of advent of technology. So, for instance, I was very pleasantly surprised to know that the travel, the journey to one of the sort of nearby, say, other important shrines, which is a Muslim shrine in Las Bela of Shah Nurani, Hazrat Shah Bilawal Nurani. While, as you said, there are people who are coming from Karachi in cars, in jeeps, on motorcycles, and even rickshaws. But yet, there is a set of devoted fakirs, the Lahutis, who set out from Sehman at the conclusion of the Sehman Mela of Hazrat Lal Shehbaz Qalandar, and undertake a journey of almost 21 days, across the Kirthar mountain, very a rather hazardous journey, to undertake in that weather, in the month of Shaban. So, and sort of and arrive and pay their respects, the shrine of Shah Bilawal Nurani. And then sort of when I asked some of my friends why these people were doing it when everyone else is sort of following it, and the response I got was that there is more sawab, that if you go walking on foot, there you earn more sawab and you are dearer to the saint than sort of if you were to travel there on a car or other motorized transport.
Yeah.
Definitely these. Yeah, please.
Sorry, there is a delay, so that's a little awkward. But I just wanted to kind of go with what you just said, because I had the very same experience with Shah Nurani. So I even have this connection that in the older times, Lal Shahbaz, Sevan, and then Shah Nurani was connected to Nani Mandir. And then even some people even say, at least in the oral traditions, but also in some of these hagiographical little pamphlets that I collected at Shah Nurani, that the journey even went further to the Asula Island. So the people actually, and this is interesting. Do you know why this is interesting? Because it shows that to a certain extent, before these kinds of modern times and the confining of religious boundaries, the increasing confining of religious boundaries, that there was this very, if I call it a syncretic, it's already wrong, right? Because it was before all of these kinds of nationalistic religions were established. There was a very local kind of network, which was not very interested in, is this a Hindu tradition? Is this a Muslim tradition? And this journey from Sevan through then Nurani and then to Hinglaj is a very good example for this.
And I think sort of, just sort of building on what you just said, that at least among the Baloch tribes, I have noticed that the efficacy of the saint, and the visit to the shrine of a particular saint count for ordinary folks counts as much as any formal, sort of religious aspect, So, so a saint like Lal Shehbaz Qalandar or Shah Nurani, who have a reputation for certain kinds of miracles or karamat or others, so people would visit them regardless of the religious identity of the saint or shrine, So I think there are these everyday sensibilities and practices that some of us sort of have lost sight of, because we are so much preoccupied with these religious nationalist categories, that have sort of come into play in South Asia. Now, moving on, I also have a sort of a broader question that has sort of been picking at my mind, which is the relationship of both sort of the Hinglaj Mata Mandir and the practices there, as well as sort of the other Sufi shrines like Shah Bilawal Nurani and, Lal Shahbaz Qalandar. And Lal Shahbaz Qalandar has a sort of a different identity, but definitely Shah Bilawal Nurani. With earlier, shall we say, pre-Islamic or even pre-Hinduism, cults of goddesses or Devis, and in particular, sort of. Is there a relationship between, for example, the prevalence of Shivite shrines and worship practices, and subsequent Sufi practices, in parts of Sindh and Balochistan, because of the shared ascetic tradition, right? But even thinking earlier, so I noticed that both at the shrine of Shah Nurani and at Hinglaj Mata, there is a practice of sort of taking a dunk in the water and then sort of coming out sort of from the other side. There's an underground passage, and then you are supposed to sort of jump in the water and then when you come out, when you finish this ritual with a pure heart and you have come out from the other side, then you have been washed of your sins, so to speak. And it just sort of brought to my mind that maybe perhaps there's something an older, which goes way back, of, sort of the idea that we are being born again, as if you are being born from your mother's womb again, so to speak, so through these, sets of practices. So and maybe it's a pure conjecture on my part, but I was just wondering if you could sort of speak to the heterogeneity and but at the same time certain similarities too between these practices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the curious part here is certainly that. I'm having a. Could you maybe turn down a little bit my volume so that I don't hear myself? Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, this is the main question, right? Okay, what can we learn from the similarity of these rituals? And again, it's unfortunate to say, or maybe not unfortunate to say, that there might be a certain form of correlation, but causality is really, really difficult to establish in these things, right? It's just a very interesting topic as it is, because also in myth, in the story between the different communities, the Nath yogis, the yogis from Sindh, right, and how they related to then, Sufis and saintly figures in Sindh. Also in there, you already have a progress of writing and rewriting of history between these two communities, right? So as long as you don't really find a certain text from a certain kind of date where okay, at least this date and this day and age, we had a myth that looked like this and that, right? Then you can, then it's really, really difficult to establish what the relationship between the communities were, right? And so with rituals, it's very similar. You're right. For example, if you think of Nurani, right? If you had the chance to go up, I don't know how it is now, but many years ago, there was a little ladder to climb up and then go through this little hole in the wall into this cave. Beautiful cave and beautiful experience.
Still very much there.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting experience. And you're right, it's very similar to Hinglaj in the sense that you need to go through a tunnel, you need to go into the mountain. And in Hinglaj, you are reborn out of the womb of the goddess, and the womb of the goddess here is then the actual mountain, right? In Shah Nurani, it's very similar. And so some people say that the stone that looks a little bit like a camel shape, which is supposed to be the camel of the saint, before was interpreted as a Shiva Linga, right? So as a sign of the god Shiva. And so there's so many of these small kinds of symbols here and there, which I often just read as a palimpsest of stories, put on top of each other, where it's really hard for us to find any kind of origin without being knee deep in ideology myself or ourself, right? Because if my attempt would be to find, so to say, an origin of, let's say, Hindu traces at this place, I'm sure I might find parts of this, right? But I might also need to ask myself, why would it be so important to trace and to show that one of these traditions is the actual one that was there before? It's more interesting to see how they, how these different kinds of semiotic languages overlapped over time. And suddenly, a Shiva Linga became a camel, right? Or a split stone becomes, split in half by the sword by Hazrat Ali. So this overlapping of landscapes, I think, is much more interesting than, so to say, the wish to find any kind of definitive proof for a certain kind of origin, which I find very often people are a little disappointed, at least when they ask me to date the place and to once and for all, finally, to confirm to them that this place is indeed 200,000-year-old Hindu place. And I always have to disappoint them and say, well, it's only little that we know. And it's really difficult to actually, date it to either one or the other tradition. So I repeat myself again, but it's a good point and it's worth being repeated. And what we find in all of these rituals, as you asked me, between Nurani, the Sufi shrines, and so, is a certain form of relationship between the traditions. Even if you can speak about proto-Hinduism, or if you speak about just the sectarian communities, the Nath yogis would be important in this regard, for example. However you want to call it, there was a very strong connection between both of them. Both of these traditions found places that were important because they were either on trading routes. They had water, right? Don't forget the importance of water in Balochistan. Nurani has water, right? Hinglaj has water. Unfortunately, less and less water, unfortunately. When I was, just remember, the first time when I was there in 2009, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, there was an abundance of water in this valley, abundance. And last time I was there, unfortunately, it came down to smaller ponds and a little trickle. So that's also something that you need to think about in this with these places. It's not only the rituals that change, but the landscapes change, and because the landscapes change, the rituals change, right? There is a constant kind of being in the world, communication with mountains, the plants, the water, and the narratives that spin around those developments. And so if one of the ponds, for example, as in the case of Hinglaj, dries out right in front of the temple, there was one pond right in front of the temple of Hinglaj which dried out, and then the Hinglaj Shiva Mandali basically just concreted the place because they couldn't do anything with it. So when one of these ponds changed so prominently, and they were so prominent before, the narrative needs to change. Somebody needs to explain this, right? So again, you have this, as you said, so brilliantly before, you have this constant changing of tradition, the reactivating of certain aspects of a tradition, the rereading of certain, so it's constantly moving. And even my book can only be a small snapshot of a development between these years that I stayed there, right? Because the last time I was there already was completely different. It was electricity into the valley, unbelievable. And there was a door that the organization had. So somebody certainly could write a new book about Hinglaj and have very different kind of conclusions because it changes so quickly, which is great because it's one of the most prominent places for the Hindu community in Pakistan, and people are very proud to go there, very happy to go there. Numbers rise. Unfortunately, with the rising of numbers, you also have then pollution, drying out of waters, and all of these problems that then come with the modernization of these sedentary rituals, right? Sorry, you're muted.
You're right. Even over the last 5 or 6 years, too, the space around the Hinglaj Mata Mandir has changed so much. A lot of tile work has been done in the sort of the inner sanctum. Additional guest houses, sort of rooms for visitors have been built. a gate has been installed, a boundary wall and a gate have been installed, which has sort of completely sort of, so it has become now a gated community of, of sorts, so those things, and I'm sure sort of, those things must have sort of, led to further changes and, nuances in the ritual practices at the shrine itself. I think before sort of we open the floor, I have one last question to ask of you, and which is, as you pointed out, that it has become a greater and number of Hindu devotees coming to the shrine. Let me just see if there are questions. Just a quick second. There is, so in a sense, what is the dynamic? What is the relationship between sort of the managers of the temple and the sort of the Baloch tribes? I think there are some people from Sajdi tribe and others sort of, who are settled in the neighborhood of the Mandir and also sort of beyond the sacred Chandra Kop, right? There's on the Sapat beach. And also sort of between the Hindu community of Laspela, which is led by usually from the local by the local MPA or the minister, and from the Hindu community, and sort of the yatris, sort of coming from other parts of Pakistan, say like Parker, right? Is it all cooperative, or is there also they tend to vie for prestige with one another? How does it play out?
Yeah. See, was actually the main question that I had, and also an anthropological predicament, conundrum. What are you going to do with a field where everybody claims to speak the truth, the only truth, because only their tradition is the right tradition, and you try to write a book about this extremely heterogeneous field? So to answer very quickly, it was cooperative at times, competitive at other times, but very often very competitive in the exchange with the anthropologists, right? Because in one way or the other, the foundational myths related to the kul, so to the tribe, to the Baradari, to the caste, whatever you want to name it, was very important for people and was very often different and at times, as you say, contradictory as well, right? So it was very hard to kind of get everyone under this kind of overarching narrative. And so my idea was to not try to answer to the question who is right, but to actually look at the dynamics of how people try to give legitimacy or try to authenticate, if that is a word, if I'm not making this up, try to give a form of authenticity to their claims. So the whole idea of solidification was not trying to figure out what's the real story, but trying to look at this so much more, I think, so much more interesting narrative of how people make their own claim the legitimate, real, authentic kind of claim, right? And one of the relationships that you spoke about, and I'm very happy that we can touch upon this again, was the relationship between the local community and the Hinglaj Seva Mandali, so the temple organization. We know from colonial sources that at least for a certain amount of time, it was them, the Baluchi tribes in the area, who were in charge of the place for a very long time. And as colonial reports go, at times they are full of fantasy and full of colonizing, exoticizing gazes on the native people, so to say. But one of the stories speaks about, and I don't know if you have heard this, if you have not, then just for the people who might be listening, because it's such a great story, is that Hindus might come from Bhuj, the area of Kutch, might walk this whole place, might reach Hinglaj, and since it was a Baluchi Muslim tribe, it was a Muslim, as the reports go, It was a Muslim young priestess who applied the tika, so the ritual mark, on the Hindu's forehead. And with this applying, she converted them to Muslims. So that's an absolutely crazy form of imagination, because then further, they walked there as Hindus, got converted, walked back as Muslims, and then needed to be reconverted on, so to say, Hindu mother homeland. And this then was done in Gujarat, right? I never really believed this story very much until I found in one of the books the sign which was burned on people's forearm as a sign of being reconverted into, the Shiva Shakti tradition. And this was painted in this book. And really, lo and behold, at a temple in Gujarat, I actually really found this burning stamp that people used. But nobody could tell me about this story anymore. So until now, we don't know, because the priests there, of course, had no clue about this tradition, right? But anyway, there is a relationship, a curious relationship between the community there, the local community, and the institutionalization, because the interest of the institutionalization is to make this place globally appealing, and thus translating it into a language of global Hinduism. So certain things need to be taken seriously, and certain things need to be cut out, right? So this is a contradiction in a certain way, because the place has very long Sigri Muslim roots to a certain extent, right? And so at times, I think this is contradictory. At times, this is also a form of symbiosis, because the tribe at this place also gets a lot of advantages from being there with all of these people coming to them. For example, selling coconuts. Balochistan desert, not many coconuts. Coconuts need to be offered at Hinglaj. So the person who has, a large supply of coconuts is sure to get some good pocket money for that, right? So what people do, for example, let me just, I know we need to take the question. Let me just tell this last excellent story. So what people do, the local Balochis do, is they go up to, Chandrakup, the mud volcano, where you need to offer the nariyal, the coconut, right? If the coconut submerges into the mud, then Shiva, who is there, guarding, so to say, the entry to the goddess valley. And when this coconut submerges, then Shiva accepts it and says, yes, you can go on and see Hinglaj, right? And so once this nariyal, this coconut submerges, the local community stands there with very long sticks and catches them out and carries them down the hill, where they are resent to Karachi and then resold. So it's this endless kind of flow of coconuts, a circle kind of coconut, moving from Karachi, Swaminarayan Mandir, back to Balochistan, back to Swaminarayan. And I don't know how often they do this, right? So there's also a symbiosis between these communities. Sorry, but now I need to stop, because we need to take some questions. You're muted. You're muted.
I will begin with the first question from our audience. It's from Poonam Ayub. Poonam Ayub has asked that we have the access to Hinglaj Mata Mandir through the Makran Coastal Highway now. So if devotees want to visit from, India, parts of India, as per, sort of the ancient practice. So how could that be ensured? And she gives the example of the Kartarpur mechanism as one way. I am not sure that you have a good answer, or even I have a good answer, but maybe, you can say a few words.
I mean, Kartarpur mechanism is not going to work because it's Balochistan. It's not on the border, it's right through Sindh, and then also in Balochistan, which is not one of the most, let's say, it's a very contagious place also. It's a difficult place.
Yes.
But the Kartarpur mechanism is certainly not going to work. But to maybe answer your question differently, there has been an excess, and there has been a whole, I'm going to do blatant self-advertisement now, I'm sorry for that. But the chapter in my book talks about this form of market, and this form of business involved in getting Hindus from India to Balochistan. So there is a mechanism involved, It's certainly not the Kartarpur mechanism, but the two governments have been working on this and have been talking about this at least since 2006, when Jaswant Singh, the then foreign minister, made this, very historic journey to Balochistan. So since then, the conversation was going on, but since it's a little bit inside the country, I think it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, that's right. Because I think in terms of the kind of security dynamics in Balochistan, and especially in Makran region, over the last years, sort of tend to militate against an easy or smooth solution of the Kartarpur kind. But definitely it is on the agenda of both the governments, and the provincial government certainly thinks, the government of Balochistan certainly thinks that, it could be sort of used as a both pilgrimage place, but also a source of revenue for the government and for the communities, for the people of the area.
Yeah.
So let's take the next question from our audience. And we have a question from Hamza, which says, what role does the shrine play in the identity of Pakistani Hindus today? You have already spoken to this question during our conversation, but perhaps you could give a brief answer in clips, condense for Hamza.
I mean, directly to Hamza, that was kind of my question that I introduced in my first colloquium. That was kind of the main research question that I had. So it's really difficult to now break it down to a few words, but only in a few sentences. I think in a very short amount of time, Pakistani Hindus have become more and more proud and also possible to exist in the public as Pakistanis and as Hindus simultaneously. What does this mean? I think that only a few decades ago, it was very difficult to be both things at the same time, Pakistani and Hindu. And it was almost impossible, because why? Because when people wrote about their Hindu traditions in Pakistan, they did it in their local language. They did it in Sindhi, they did it in Marwari, they did it in Gujarati. But only around the 90s, you find the first Urdu publications on Hinduism in Pakistan, which to me is, I think, a proof that then in the 90s, you have the first time a national consciousness, which doesn't mean that it was not there. But I think it now kind of goes out into the public stage. It's now possible to be betwixt and between, still, nevertheless, but to be a Pakistani and a Hindu at the same time. And I think Hinglaj was one of the most important developments in this regard. Because, whatever you want to think about this, it's one of the most important brands of Pakistani Hinduism, if you want to keep it in this kind of language. It's one of the first things that pop up when people Google search, want to know anything about Pakistani Hinduism. So I think it was extremely important, not only for the fact that people could go there and have an undisturbed kind of ritual freedom, a sense of pride, a sense of history, because it's a very old place. So I think its role is, I say this as the author of a book on Hinglaj, but I think its role is unbelievably important to the identity of Pakistani Hindus today. I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you. Another sort of very relevant question, I would say, that from Ejaz is worried about the environmental and ecological consequences of the large increase in the number and the influx of devotees to Hinglaj Mata Mandir, and what it means for the wildlife in the Hingol River estuary, especially the crocodiles there. What is the sort of the dynamic between the crocodiles and the devotees? That's what he wants to know. But I think there's a larger question or concern in his mind,
Yeah, I think that would be a really good research project, don't you think? Pilgrim crocodile relationships in Balochistan, that would be really interesting. I have seen them. I have seen the crocodiles there. They're impressive. On a more serious note, what you say is absolutely important and crucial, because the influx of people has unbelievably influenced the environment to such an extent that there is another movement now that people don't even want to go to Hinglaj anymore, because they say कि अभी ये सब बदल गया है, हम क्या करें? ये Hinglaj नहीं है, ठीक है? So they say if you really want to see the goddess, you need to go up to Chorasi, which is like a hill, a little bit behind the valley, and which what we had about the kinesthetic part of rituals is only accessible by foot. So the interesting kind of doubling or the shifting that we have is away from Hinglaj, where people say, too many people, it has become a picnic. People come, they eat there, they go back within 3 hours. There's no spiritual atmosphere there anymore. So if you want to experience the khalis, the real thing, then you need to go up. Again, walk, and you need to go to Chorasi, where you can talk with the goddess then again. So there would be one answer from the more, ritual, and religious aspect. But the damage to the development, and I think you mean the environment here and the ecology, is very, very significant, very significant. So that would be another full year research project there. I think. I hope you can do it. Someone can do it. I hope.
There are some, thank you very much. And there are some further questions. I'll take this one as the last, one. I think probably the answer is in the negative, but someone asked in our audience that whether Hinglaj Devi Shrine, Hinglaj Mata Shrine, is connected to the Katasraj temple in Punjab in any way. So if you could sort of speak briefly to it.
As far as I know, no. But that doesn't mean anything. In my time, I went to Katasraj once, only tried to exactly search for this connection, but apparently there is no connection there between Katasraj and Hinglaj. As far as I know, I'm sure there might be one or the other connection. They were also so far apart and also located with so many different kinds of traditions that historically there was little connection there. You need to imagine, why should people draw before 47 a connection between these two places, which are thousands and thousands of kilometers apart, right? Only, I think, after the establishment of Pakistan, these two would fall, so to say, into one kind of confined Hindu space within this new nation state. And so now I think people are drawing associations, particularly, heritage, Hindu heritage in Pakistan, the books about the Pakistani temples, for example, would talk about the Hindu heritage in Pakistan and with the Katasraj on the cover. But I think that these are all very more modern or more recent associations. But in oral traditions, in the texts that certainly in the Sanskrit, no connection.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a wonderful discussion with you, and our audience has many more questions to ask, but I think we are running short of time, and it's difficult to do justice to the wonderful monograph and the research that you have carried out on Hinglaj Mata Mandir in a brief span of 1 hour. But perhaps we can continue this conversation at other platforms.
That would be lovely.
Yes, and for our audience, I want them to know that Jürgen's amazingly written book, Hinglaj Devi, has been published by OUP, so it's available on OUP bookshops and other places in Pakistan at very affordable price. I would highly recommend that you read it. And also, he has put together some amazing documentary and photographic, materials at his website, which is www.jürgenschaflechner.com. I enjoyed sort of, watching some of those, materials and the photographs, the amazing photographs of Chandrakop, right, devotees at Chandrakop at that site. So I would highly recommend our members in our audience to visit Jürgen's beautifully curated website as well. Once again, thank you very much, Jürgen, for being with us, and all the best with your future endeavors.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the time. And it would be lovely. I put the link. I hope that this is the correct one. I put the link again in the chat, and there is also one documentary film on a group of, because this question came up, a group of pilgrims from Gujarat who actually came to Hinglaj a few years ago. And this is all, and all the films are just freely available on my homepage. So have a look, drop me a line. If you think it's you want to say something, or you think it's terribly bad, or it's wonderfully good. And my email is just available on my homepage. Thank you so much, Hafeez. That was excellent.
Thank you, and have a great evening in Berlin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.